Well, this is Emo on Emo's Rock and Roll Magic Show here on 101.5 KOCI. And today, it is with great honor that we get to speak with Ian Anderson, frontman of one of the most important progressive rock bands of all time, Jethro Tull. So how are you doing today, Ian?
Well, I'm in good shape, and I just come back from a very, very hot concert in Athens, where I played in a 2,000-year-old Greek amphitheater at the foot of the Parthenon. And at my age, jumping around in 35 degrees heat is a test. It's a bit like being at being in the tennis finals in Flushing Meadows or somewhere. you've got to be reasonably fit, and not only that, but understand your body quite well to perform in outdoor summer temperatures. But Northern California is relatively a pussycat compared to some places I have to play.
Yeah. Well, hopefully Orange County treats you all right and it's not too hot. It can get a little toasty in the beginning of July, but hopefully it's not like Athens was for you.
Yeah.
Well, Ian has a show with Jethro Tull on July 6th at 5 Point Amphitheater in Irvine. And the tour you are on is to celebrate 50 years of Jethro Tull, which is absolutely incredible to have this music that has left this legacy for so long. So what are some things we can expect to entice us at the show at 5 Point on July 6th?
It's a retrospective, really, of the early decade and a half, the first 15 years or so of Jethro Tull. It focuses mostly on that period, really, throughout the 70s into the 80s. And I guess it's the time when most people who know of Jethro Tull will have come to appreciate the band through that period, and even younger fans, because we do have some in certain countries of the world, probably not in the USA, where they're all senior citizens by now, but in other places, even the younger fans, they hear about Jethro Tull from their parents or perhaps their grandparents, and they look it up, and they always gravitate back to that era of the 70s, which has a huge interest, I think, for younger people, because it was such a momentous time in the change of the old guard and the beginnings of a lot of cultural and artistic changes and political changes too, which swept not only the USA but all of the world. And I think it's an era for which people who weren't even born then still have a kind of nostalgia. So the 70s is probably in itself innately attractive. And of course we are now 51 years into our professional business as musicians under the name Jethro Tull, because that began in January of 1968. But as far as the US is concerned, it is technically our 50th anniversary in the USA, because we didn't hit your shores until 1969. Then we did 3 tours where we began slowly to make our names over there.
I see how you did that. Well, I am 25 years old, so I might fall into the younger category that you were just talking about. And I agree with everything you just said, and how the 70s really kind of birthed all these amazing rock and roll bands, including Jethro Tull, of course. And a lot of my friends who are the same age as me also love your music, and it really shows how even after 50 years you can make such an impact on every generation. And I just think that's so cool.
Well, it is the case, I think, perhaps strangely in the Hispanic countries, the Mediterranean countries, the Latin countries, that they seem to it seems to be a real interest in that kind of era from young people. I mean, teenagers and people in their early 20s.
Yeah, that's amazing.
We usually find at our concerts in Italy and Spain and so on that we have a lot of younger people in the audience, compared to perhaps playing in the UK or the USA, where paramedics frequently have to be called.
Oh, that's amazing.
So far, not to attend to me, but
well, that's good.
I wish I was only joking about what I just said.
Well, throughout the past 50 years, Jethro Tull has gone through many different lineups of musicians in the band, but of course, you have been sticking through it the whole time. Can you tell us about the current lineup and how and their effect on the music that you're playing right now?
Yeah, there have been really 36 other members of Jethro Tull over the years. Wow. I think it's about the same number as the famous Spinal Tap were reported to have fictitiously had. But it's kind of nice to have this huge extended family of people, all with very different musical styles and interests, and I find it very difficult not to think about them when I'm on stage performing, because I do put myself back into the time when I performed that music and what it's about. You know, I may be singing it today or 2 nights ago, but I'm still always rather like an actor. I put myself in the role. I have to get into the character of what I'm singing about. Sometimes it is literally a human character, so I have to really engage with that. I always think when you're a performer on stage, you have to do a little more than just remember the words and play the right note.
Oh, yeah.
And goodness knows that could be quite difficult in itself, given that it's sometimes quite complex music and there's a lot of it. But I think you have to go that bit further and really get into character. It's a bit like being a method actor. You know, you've got to step into that character and become that person. And you have, well, for me, probably 2 or 3 minutes before a show, and about 30 seconds afterwards, where I am still in that character. But the rest of the day, I'm just like your typical granddad, you know, shuffling through the supermarket aisles, trying to remember where the soft fruit is.
Well, so you do break character sometimes.
Oh yeah. I mean, from my earliest days, I've not been a rock and roll animal. I've always been a bit of a loner. You know, I sit in my hotel room and read a book or watch CNN, and tend not to. I've never been socially engaged with the world of rock music, and I know a few people from the world of music, but I wouldn't say any of them are really close friends. There are some who I would count as friends, you know, literally just maybe 2 or 3 people that I perhaps more regularly have worked with. But other than the guys in the band, you know, it's, and a couple of girls, I don't really have people that I would really describe as close friends. So that's why the musical family of Jethro Tull, all those people over all those years, is really quite important to me.
Yeah, I love that. It's all just a big musical family.
And you'll get to meet some of them during the show, because some of them pop up to introduce a song, and we get to see what they look like in their senile advanced state.
Put some faces to it. Well, let's go back in time now, perhaps all the way back to when you lived in Scotland, where you were born. What sparked your interest in music in the first place?
My music experiences were really twofold. It was church music, because obviously at school you engage to a certain degree with the music of the Christian church in my case, and a little bit of Scottish folk music. I suppose those were the 2 influences. But when I listened to my father's old 78 RPM records, when I was allowed to carefully put them on the gramophone and play them, it was big band jazz. It was wartime music, Duke Ellington and Benny Goodman and so on. It was something rather seductive about it. It was obviously very rhythmic, and it had that certain feel, which I later discovered was referred to as syncopation. And I heard that again as a young teenager when I first heard Muddy Waters and various blues guys, and I put all of that together and made that connection. And perhaps also the early Elvis Presley, when he did Heartbreak Hotel, for example. There's some common elements in all of that. It was the blues. It was the blues scale, and that it was something that I suppose was very much the founding influence in my musical world, because as soon as I could play an instrument, it was those 5 notes that I found could could conjure up a lot of emotion, a lot of rather exotic emotion. And when I heard Muddy Waters singing "She's 19 Years Old," I thought, wow, wouldn't it be great to be as old as Muddy Waters is and have a 19-year-old girlfriend?
That was at the goal.
I was only 15 at the time, but I thought, wow, if you get lucky enough to be a professional musician, I mean, not only do you get the babes, but you keep getting them even when you're really old. And this seemed like a brilliant thing to try and do. So, but not being black from Chicago or further south, and not having the cultural and traditions as roots, it seemed a bit of a sham for me to be, or attempt to be, an authentic blues musician. So quickly, when I became a professional, I decided I should strike out on, some rather more original territory, which took me into the world of what became quickly known as progressive rock.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I love that, how you take those influences and instead of just copying them and trying to be like them, you just use it to form your own unique kind of music. And Jethro Tull definitely did that, and you can see that influence in it. Well, we need to address the prominent artifact that makes you and Jethro Tull so unique, which of course is the flute. So what made you decide to pick up the flute and incorporate it into rock and roll?
I had a guitar, I think, at the age of maybe 11. My father bought me this beat-up old Spanish guitar for about $10. And it was, it was a beast to try and play. It was a horrible instrument, but it gave me a little bit of an encouragement to try and make a noise with a musical instrument. And when I was in my mid-teens, then I managed to get a slightly better guitar. And I quickly progressed to being able to improvise in terms of the blues structure of things. And then when I was 18, I think I was 18, I heard John Mayall and the Blues Breakers with their new guitar player, Eric Clapton. And when I heard Eric Clapton, I thought, wow, this guy's just so far ahead of me and what I can do that maybe I should find something else to do. And it was worse than that, because I then found out that it wasn't just Eric Clapton. There was also Jeff Beck and Jimmy Page and Richie Blackmore. These were the hotshot guitar players down in London. And so rather than try to emulate them and be 2 or 3 years behind in terms of ability and experience, I thought I should find something else to do. And for no particular reason, I traded in my Fender Stratocaster for a $50 flute and a Shure Unidyne 3 microphone built in Chicago, USA. And this was a professional vocalist microphone. And the flute was not. The flute was a cheapest student model, but it looked pretty. And I thought, okay, fair deal, I'll give it a go. And I couldn't get a note out of the flute for about 4 or 5 months, and then suddenly it clicked. Suddenly I got a note, and then I got another one, and within a day I could play the blues. And so a couple of weeks later I was on stage at the Marquee Club playing the flute in a blues band, which not many other people, actually not anybody else was doing. So it got noticed, and I just took it on from there.
Well, you sure showed the world that the flute can really be badass by the way you played it. So good job there.
I'm not sure if it's badass. It can be slightly naughty. I know what you mean, yes.
Well, what is the reason for so often standing on one foot while you play the flute?
Because I used to do that when I played the harmonica. And I tell people that when because when you play blues harmonica, you actually suck the notes rather than blow them. Now, a lot of them is the notes you bend, you're actually sucking the notes. So you're doing a lot of sharp intake of breath. And I found that when I did that, I tended to lift one leg off the ground, and perhaps because my underpants were too tight, I'm not sure. But whatever it was, I got the reputation of playing standing on one leg, and the first people who ever wrote about Jethro Tull in the music press noticed 2 things. They noticed that they had a guy stood in the middle who played the flute and stood on one leg, both of which were came naturally to me. So I started to do that, and it became a little bit of a cheesy kind of bit of shtick that probably served me well over the years, and dutifully I tend to do that today, just as a little throwback to those early days at the Marquee Club. And people like it. Chuck Berry had his duck walk.
Yeah.
Joe Cocker had his windmill arms, as indeed did Pete Townsend playing the guitar. And if you can find some little physical thing that makes you as a performer a little different to everybody else, then that's a good career move.
Oh yeah, exactly. It became your
thing. But if you sit down to try and contrive it, you sit down to try and work something out, chances are it will not be successful. So it really has to be something that comes naturally to you, something that comes from within, and you don't really question it. You just do it, and then people notice it, and you realize with a Pavlovian response that that you get that reaction, and so you do it again. And it's a bit like teaching a dog to sit up and beg. It gets patted on the head and given a treat, and so we musicians are not too dissimilar. We learn what the audience like, and then we do it again because we want that affection, that warmth, that approval. Even if perhaps it is a little cheesy, a little corny, but it's something, I suppose, that in small measure is a useful thing to have.
Yeah, we all love a little cheese.
You're in my game, it's useful to have.
Oh, yeah. Well, along with guitar, piano, of course, the flute, I read that you also play a variety of exotic instruments that I probably am not even pronouncing right, which includes the bouzouki, balaleka, again, probably not pronouncing these right, and some whistles, too. So out of absolutely everything, what is the most fun instrument for you to play? Is it still the flute, or is it something else random?
Well, I've had a go at a lot of things. I played drums on a few songs, and I played bass on quite a lot of songs, and I played guitar, of course, and I played many of the wind instruments, and I've even had a go at the violin. Just, I think, on one track comes to mind from a long time ago, but there are some things that really are quite difficult. Violin, cello, they're really tricky. And the brass instruments like trombones and horns and things, I don't think I could pick one of those up and make any useful noises. But there are some things you can pick up, and sometimes within minutes or a couple of hours you've got a tune. And the thing is, when you can't really play the instrument, you tend to simplify what you're doing, and it's a good exercise in bringing you back to the basics of music. And as a songwriter, sometimes you get ideas when you pick up an instrument you can't really play. You get ideas that you would not get if you were playing the instrument you're most familiar with. So it is quite useful. A lot of songs I've recorded over the years have been written on things that I couldn't play properly. It works out quite well.
Well, that's amazing. That's so impressive to be able to play all these instruments, not even just play them, but play them really well. So we love that. And your 50th anniversary tour is celebrating specifically the 50th anniversary of the release of Jethro Tull's first album called This Was, released in 1968. Now, this album had a much more rhythm and blues and kind of jazzy sound than all of the albums that came after, which had more of that typical, infamous Jethro Tull progressive sound. So what was the cause for this shift in sound?
Well, it was a pragmatic reality of the day that if you wanted to get noticed, you had to do what was going to attract people. And there was a big blues boom in the UK, and a lot of bands and a lot of clubs that specialized in that kind of music. And so it was really a way of getting work. And since I had listened to blues a lot as a young man, that it was a natural thing to try to do for a little while. But as I said, I wasn't a middle-aged black guy with the credentials. I was a young white kid from the middle classes of England or Scotland, and so I had to do it to get noticed. But I quickly wanted to write my own songs, and so the first album was called This Was Jethro Tull, because I knew at the time we released it, I wouldn't be doing that again. So it was a historic statement in its own right.
Oh, okay.
I remember
Mystery
thinking,
solved.
as people said, well, what does it mean this was? And I said, well, wait and see when you hear the second album.
So it was pre-planned.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to run because I have another interview waiting for me, and it's been great to talk to you, and I look forward to being in California in a few weeks' time.
Well, thank you so much for talking to us. This was so much fun. And yes, listeners, July 6th, 5 Point Amphitheater in Irvine. You won't want to miss Ian Anderson with Jethro Tull.